Forgiveness happens inside my skin. It's a decision, but reconciliation is restoration of trust.
Welcome to the Unrefined podcast, broadcasting live from the edge of ordinary. We're tuning the dial to the supernatural, the fringe, and the faith that won't fit the mold. If you want the full show, the deep cuts, the unfiltered conversations, grab your backstage pass at join.unrefinedpodcast.com. All right, everybody. Hey, you guys. We're back for another exciting episode of Unrefined, and I have an awesome guest here today. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most difficult and necessary parts of the Christian life, forgiveness. What does it really mean to forgive? How do you separate forgiveness from reconciliation? What happens inside us spiritually, emotionally, physically, and relationally when we carry unforgiveness? Our guest has spent decades studying forgiveness, writing about it, and helping people walk through the real process of healing. His work is not just academic, it's been shaped by deep personal tragedy and profound commitment to helping others find freedom. He is the author of Forgiving and Reconciling and Moving Forward. I am so honored today to welcome to the show Dr. Everett Worthington.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Good to be with you and Sandy.
Yeah. So, what would you prefer me to call you?
Everybody calls me Ev.
Yeah, I saw that in the book, and I didn't want to presume, though, and just start calling you Eb, but I love that, so that's great.
You don't want to be different from everybody else, so
no,
go ahead.
I don't, yeah. Sandy and I have been talking a lot about your book because it's actually helped us, which Sandy's here, by the way, everybody. I forgot to introduce my wife.
Hey.
Yeah, I've been talking to Sandy a lot about, when I was reading through the book and processing it, it just profoundly stuck with me, and we'll get more into this in the show, the different viewpoints of forgiveness and stuff out there, which we'll talk about that as well. But before we dive in, I want to throw you the first pitch. A lot of people teach things, but a lot of people have had to live out the things. And what really profoundly impacted my heart is the fact that you had a ministry of forgiveness and then you had to live it. Will you tell us your story about all that and how that came to be?
Sure. Well, I started studying forgiveness. Well, of course, as a Christian, I kind of was living it out, but never really had anything huge to forgive. It was the garden variety things that happened to us. But I was really spending a part-time private practice on couple therapy. And almost all couple therapy ends up, if it's successful, with people talking about forgiving things that had troubled them. So that was kind of my experience. And we started research on that because of some very talented graduate students. I wrote a paper on forgiveness in couple therapy, and then that started us studying it scientifically. So we wrote a book that came out with InterVarsity Press in 1997 called To Forgive is Human. So this, even though InterVarsity is a Christian press, we took the position that this is part of common grace, not specific grace. So not just for Christians, but for anybody. I just sent that manuscript off to the publisher about December of 95, and then on New Year's Eve night, my mother had gone to bed early. She didn't drive, so the house was dark, no car in the driveway, and it turned out that there was a young man that wanted to burglarize her house, and it just looked like a perfect crime to him because New Year's Eve night, nobody home. I could just waltz in there and take whatever I want. Well, it turned out, of course, my mom had gone to bed early, and so when he broke in and was searching the house, she woke up and came out of her bedroom, and he was there in the hallway right outside of her bedroom, and saw her, and she saw him, and she probably confronted him, and that triggered off a response in him, which was he had a crowbar that he had used to break the window out of the door to get in. And so, standing there with that crowbar, he reached out and struck her, and she fell, and he struck her again and again until really she was dying. The next morning, my brother went over and found her body. He had called her. She didn't drive, so it was really unusual that she didn't answer the phone. So that stimulated him to go over and take his young son. And they went in the house. He had the key, and the house was a shambles because of the burglary and the searching that had been done. And then when he walked into the hallway, there was her body, and blood all over the place. So it was a pretty terrible sight. He covered up his son's eyes and went out, called me. I live in Richmond, Virginia. They lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's just about a 7-hour difference. He called me and said, "Can you call our sister, who also lives in Richmond, and come down? That Mama's been murdered." And so we drove down there and got kind of thrown into the middle of this murder investigation. They took us over to the house. It was a pretty terrible sight to see it all torn up. I grew up in that house for 22 years, I guess. Walked to the University of Tennessee, which was nearby, but I hadn't been home for a while, since the last Christmas, I guess. And it was pretty terrible to see all of the devastation that had gone on in the house. So the police had a theory, and the theory was that this had been a burglary gone bad. It turns out there'd been a number of burglaries in that general neighborhood, about 6 or 7. And so that night, as my brother and my sister and I sat in Mike's back room, we were putting together the story about what the police thought happened. And we all got really angry as, we pondered this. And I remember getting so angry, I pointed to a baseball bat and I said, "I wish whoever did that were here. I would take that baseball bat. I would hit him in the head till he died." I said he wouldn't last 10 minutes. My brother said, "Well, he wouldn't last 5 minutes if I got a hold of him." My sister said, "Well, I'd make him last an hour." We were all really, really angry about this. So that night, after the talk, I went up to my aunt's house, and I was spending the night up there. I couldn't sleep because I was so angry. I was just kind of pacing around and around the bed and raging, basically. And it got to be about 3 a.m., and I thought, "Man, this is crazy. I'm just angry, and I need to just stop this and do something at least that's productive," because I didn't feel like I could sleep. And so I sat down on the bed to write a eulogy for Mom. I was the oldest child, and my father already had died about 5 years earlier with cancer. And so I'm sitting there thinking about what is the meaning of life. This woman had lived basically within 20 miles of the house that I grew up in all of her life. The only time she had really gone out of that was in World War II. She was in the Army Nursing Corps for a few years. So the rest of the time, she just was in a local place. And I thought, well, what is the meaning of our life there? And suddenly I kind of realized here I am. I study forgiveness. I just wrote a book on forgiveness. I do therapy to help people forgive, and yet I have not allowed myself to even think the word forgiveness during this whole day. It's almost 24 hours since I heard. And so I sat down and tried to think through a kind of a method that we had developed to help people forgive. It eventually became known as Reach Forgiveness because it was 5 steps that spell out REACH and an acronym to help people remember the steps. And so as I thought through what it must be like to be out in the cold on a New Year's Eve night, watching a darkened house, thinking this is going to be a perfect crime, then finally breaking in and getting that spoiled. And not only is it spoiled, but this older woman has come out of her bedroom. She's looking at this young man. So he's probably angry that his perfect crime is spoiled. He's probably afraid that, she's recognizes him. He's probably going to get turned into the police and go to jail. He just responded in anger, frustration, fear, and struck her until she died. Well, at that point, in thinking through this, I couldn't help but just kind of fly back in my memory to earlier that night where I had stood in Mike's back room and I had pointed to that baseball bat and said, I wish whoever did that were here. I would take that baseball bat and hit him in the head till he died. And the confrontation with the Lord right there, I just thought, well, whose heart is darker? Is it this young man whose perfect crime is spoiled, who is, afraid he's going to go to jail? He hasn't had time to deal with this, to think about it. Or is it me? I've had 24 hours to think about this, and yet I'm still willing to point to a baseball bat and say I would kill him if he was here. And I thought, well, my heart is darker than his heart. And so that meant that I could take this to the Lord and be forgiven. And if I could be forgiven, I thought, well, who am I to hold this against this young man? And so I was able to forgive the young man at that point. Now, of course, forgiving the young man is something that happens in our heart or inside our body, inside our skin. That did not mean that I was giving up on justice. Justice is something social and societal, and it's a different arena than what happens inside our skin. So I could still hope that he would be captured and that he would be called to account for his crime. And yet I could personally forgive him for the pain, the loss that we encountered as a family as a result of that.
Wow. That's such a deeply tragic story that I remember when I read that, it just really touched me, and hearing it up close really touches me too. So I want to go into the different topics today, and feel free as we talk to include stuff about your journey, about this story too, because I think that was what was so significant to me in the book, how you would relate it back to what you went through. So there's so many different versions of forgiveness out there, particularly, and we're a Christian podcast. And so in the Christian circles, so many different theologies of forgiveness. When I was researching you, I ended up pulling up another one from, I'm sure, another scholar, Dr. Kendall, R.T. Kendall.
Right.
And
He's, I think, a pastor in Florida or something like that, I think. But wrote a couple of books, one on forgiveness, one on self-forgiveness.
Yeah. And I'd read through his book years ago, so I kind of started researching and looking at the two different perspectives, and I was just like, wow, it's the same. It's the heart for forgiveness, but it's different. And I had been taught differently too. So to kind of give us a baseline here, what is your definition of forgiveness? What is it?
Well, I proposed in 2006 a scientific theory of forgiveness, and really that kind of informs the way that I understand forgiveness. So this theory is a stress and coping theory. So it turns out this is by far the most used theory of understanding forgiveness in psychology. But it starts with a stressor. People experience a demand to change. Well, in forgiveness, that is usually an offense or a hurt or some kind of transgression against the person. And then we respond to that stressor by appraising it, by evaluating it. And so the major evaluation, the first evaluation we make is this threatening? Is this, hurt threatening to me? If we say, yes, it is threatening, we kind of measure it about, do I think I can cope with this without any trouble? And if I think I can cope with it, I go ahead and just deal with it. But if it's going to give me some trouble, then I'm probably going to move to the third step in this, which is a stress reaction. So this is going to create a stress reaction. What in the theory of the stress and coping theory of forgiveness, there's a second appraisal that we make, and that's an appraisal of how much injustice has this caused us? And we kind of keep track of that informally in our mind. So if I feel like this is the way I would like it to be resolved, and this is the way it is, and then somebody apologizes to me, well, that takes a little bit of the injustice away, because I know it's difficult to sincerely apologize. And so, okay, well, they're kind of making up for some of the injustice. So I kind of adjust my injustice gap. If they say, well, I'd like to make this up to you, I'd like to give you $1 million. I'm like, okay, well, that'll take the edge off of it just a little bit. And so, and oh, by the way, can I clean your toilets for the rest of my adult life? And I'm like, all right. So we've got down now to a really small injustice gap. And what we can do is whereas this may have seemed like a giant amount of hurt I can never get over, because we have this adjustable injustice gap, I can get it down to a reasonable amount that I can actually forgive. So that however large that injustice gap is going to make my stress reaction more or less. And so my stress reaction might be cognitive. It might be, mental. I feel angry and I ruminate about this and do all kinds of mental things. But it also can be emotional. It can be motivational. It can be behavioral. There are all kinds of parts to this. And of course, it's going to be physiological. It's going to be, I'm going to be ramped up in this freeze, fight, flight mode. And so my body is going to be doing things like the blood pressure going up and the heart rate going up and the skin conductance going up, and hormones are going to be dumped into my system, and cortisol is going to be flowing in, and adrenaline is going to be flowing in. And all of these things are going to be acting on my physiology. So here I am. If my physiology is upset and I don't like the way that I feel, I try to cope with it in some way. And I can cope with it many ways. There are many biblical ways I can deal with injustice. I can turn it over to God for God's divine justice. I can turn it over to God just by relinquishing it. I can see justice done. I can see this person get caught and arrested and tried and convicted and sentenced, and all of these things can reduce my injustice gap. I can forbear, as Paul says, forgiving them and forbearing. Forbearing is like, I'm just going to tolerate this for the good of the relationship. So that's what forbearance is. I can accept that stuff happens. Stuff happens. See, and just I'm moving on. Life is too short to deal with. Let this stuff bother me, or I can forgive. I can use many of the ways that the church over the years teach people to forgive. I can pray for this person. I can try to love this person even though they're an enemy. Love your enemy, says Jesus. I can use restraint, which, we don't want to allow ourselves to just respond negatively. So I can use all of these psychological methods as coping methods, and I can use all of these historically Christian church-based methods, or what's called practical theology, of course, to help people forgive, and so, or to deal with the injustice. And so, those coping methods, in general, try to either change the stressor, the event, the appraisals that I'm making, or the stress reaction. So I've named 6 or 7 different alternatives to forgiveness. So the other way, of course, I can deal with this is to forgive. Now, you asked me a very simple question like, what is my definition of forgiveness? And I've gone on for now 5 minutes on this theory. But so forgiveness is not one thing, I believe. It's 2 things. So, and they're 2 separate things, and they are lightly related to each other. They're not joined at the hip with each other. They are correlated scientifically over many, many studies. They're correlated only about 0.4, which suggests that they only share 16% of their variability. That's not much. They're different at 84% of their variability. So one of those types of forgiveness is to make a decision about how we intend to act toward this person from now on.
And this is the one that's taught in the church the most, in my opinion. That's what I was taught. And when I was reading your book, that I was like, I thought that was all forgiveness was.
Well, that is what I would say Christian forgiveness is.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this other type of forgiveness also. So the decision to forgive is a behavioral intention statement. It's not a behavior, because I can make this decision that I'm going to treat this person differently. I am not going to get even with the person. I'm not going to pay him back. And I am going to treat this person as a valued and valuable person, a person created in God's image. So there are 2 parts to this decision. One is a part that is processed in the frontal cortex, which is restraint. So this is generally in the prefrontal cortex. And it's what helps us do the right thing when the right thing is hard to do. So this matures over time. It starts maturing in like middle school, but usually it's not fully mature until 26, 27, 28. So it's just kind of getting more able to do the right thing when the right thing is the hard thing to do. And so that's like, do not pay this person back. Restrain yourself. Okay? But that's not the whole part of the decision to forgive, because the decision also uses a part a little farther back into the frontal cortex, still frontal cortex, but it's it's I'm going to treat this person as a valued and valuable person, a person created in God's image. That doesn't mean I have to hang out with him for the rest or her for the rest of my life, but I'm going to see them as a valued and valuable person. So that's decision to forgive. Uh, but I can make a sincere decision to forgive and then still feel emotionally angry and resentful and bitter and hostile and hate-filled and angry and anxious that they might hurt me again every time I think about this. And that suggests that there's this second type of forgiveness, which is emotional forgiveness. So emotional forgiveness is replacing negative, unforgiving emotions like the resentment, bitterness, hostility, hatred, anger, and fear with positive, other-oriented emotions like empathy or sympathy or compassion or love for this person. The love that is Jesus' love for the least, the lost, the lowest of people. So there are these two types of forgiveness, and they're different, and they are not dependent on each other, and they can occur in either order. So I can emotionally forgive, and that makes it easier for me to make a decision, or maybe not. Maybe I just don't think about making a decision to forgive. Or I could make a decision to forgive, and that makes it easier for me to have an emotional change or not. They're not necessarily related to each other. So there's kind of my, if you will, theory of forgiveness in a nutshell.
Well, I wanted to ask you, your book is titled Forgiving and Reconciling. And so often I know I've used it interchangeably. So could you give us maybe the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation?
Yeah. So forgiveness, you see, happens inside my skin. It's a decision. And the other type of forgiveness is the emotional forgiveness, but it happens inside my skin. But reconciliation is restoration of trust in a relationship where trust has been damaged. And that requires two people. So I am never going to reconcile with someone if they are determined that they're going to kill me. And so it turns out that reconciliation is not really mandated in any way in Scripture. It's something desirable. It's God's heart from Genesis on that He wants to reconcile all things unto Himself. And we are ambassadors of reconciliation, reconciling people to God. But we are not necessarily ambassadors of reconciliation, reconciling any two people in front of us, or even reconciling with everybody that has a grudge against me. So there's a big difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And, I've been spending the last year and a half or so writing a lot about reconciliation.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think out there in the church and in Christendom, there's also the belief that forgiveness is not complete until there's reconciliation. And you talk about in your book, and I just know in doing ministry with people that sometimes there can't, well, number one, physically be reconciliation when people have passed away or incarcerated or numerous reasons, but also there's times when boundaries need to be set as well, that the person is toxic, the person he doesn't want to change, the person is a narcissist. That's our new term for a lot of that, and it's a legitimate concern. So what I want to ask you about that is because I think God is a heart God. I think He's after our hearts. I'm not downplaying our minds. and the involvement of our minds, because I mean, I think that's where it all begins. But he's after our hearts. And when you just said that, love your enemies, I was just sitting here thinking about, we throw that around in the church, but do we really do it? Do I really do it? And so let's go into that a little bit. What does it mean to you, and in your experience and what you've been through, to love your enemies? I mean, you can't get much more of an enemy than your mom's murderer.
One of the things that we almost automatically do is we other people who have hurt us. We treat them as somebody in a different group, somebody who's different from us. We don't see them as a unique person created in God's image and fallen as we are fallen. Loving your enemy is treating the person as a valued and valuable person. And it's not necessarily, there's all these types of love. There's kind of three elements of love. There's passion, and there's commitment, and there's intimacy. And, love is made up of some amalgam of those three types. And so loving my enemy might be more on the order of a commitment to them as a person and to their well-being, to the extent that I can, safely, prudently contribute to their well-being. I think that is more the way I see loving than having a intimate relationship with this enemy. Because if this is a person who is out to get me, to kill me, it is not safe and it's not prudent to put myself in a vulnerable position of seeking to reconcile with them, of being close to them. That's just not wise to do. I can forgive them because that happens inside my skin. That's always a safe thing to do because that doesn't involve somebody else. I also know that when I forgive, it creates a desire to reconcile. But I also have to kick in my brain at this point, my reasoning part of my brain, and say, is it safe, prudent, and possible to reconcile? Yes, I want to. That's part of the way God made me. But is this the right thing to do? Is this a smart thing to do?
In your book, you talk about you love acronyms too. I love it. You have so many acronyms in your book. It's great. You have REACH. Can you briefly outline what REACH is?
Yeah, we created a way to help people forgive that now has been tested in 30 randomized trials worldwide. It's been put into a workbook form, tested with 4,600 people in 5 non-U.S. countries. It works, and it's been used all over the world. But it's based on a core of trying to promote emotional forgiveness so that it makes it easier for people to make a decision to forgive. So the core of this is to work through 5 steps to reach emotional forgiveness, where R is recall the hurt. I can't deny that I need to deal with this. I've got to face it. E, empathize with the person who harmed me. Try to understand them. Now, I can't always empathize with them. Well, it can also prompt me to feel sympathy for them, to feel compassion for them, to feel love for them, any form of love. So if two partners have a falling out, what may get them to forgive is romantic love. I mean, love in its forms can undo a multitude of sin, So it can stand for emotionally replacing the negative emotions with positive emotions like empathy, sympathy, compassion, and love. So R, recall to hurt. E, emotionally replace or empathize. A, give an altruistic gift of forgiveness, a gift that is not deserved. The person hurts me, they don't deserve to be forgiven. That's a gift that I can give them. And why might I give them that gift? Well, maybe I'm just a good person and give them a gift. But for the Christian, it's because we have been given this amazing gift of divine forgiveness, and we want to pass on that amazing gift to others. So REA, altruistic gift of forgiveness. C, commit to the forgiveness that you experience, so that H, you can hold on to that emotional forgiveness whenever you doubt. Now, once people have worked through emotional forgiveness, at that point, they're much more likely to want to make a decision to forgive than if you did this cold turkey and just said, do you make a decision to forgive? They're like, no, that's why I'm coming to this group. That's why I'm doing this workbook.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of times in our ministry and dealing with people is that we see it the opposite way. People will white knuckle forgiveness. They'll do it through gritted teeth because they're taught, and we'll get into it in a second from Matthew 6, that there's a necessity to forgive to receive God's forgiveness, which I want to kind of dive into that. But what really struck me just a second ago, you were talking about this, and I never thought about this before. You were talking about love in its many forms being a process of emotional forgiveness. It never, even when I was reading your book, it never hit me that, that God is involved in not just agape love. We try to box him in just to that. Well, that's the God kind of love, and everything else is worldly. But the reality is he's in eros, he's in romantic love, he's in brotherly love. All these different types of love, and I just had that epiphany or that revelation when you were sitting there saying that he wants to be involved in all my loves. Wow, and that's just amazing. I just wanted to share that, and that is a viable process of the whole process of forgiveness. And the other thing I wanted to ask you too, and I don't know if you're going to get here in the whole reach process, but and I'm just going to be very, very vulnerable here, and Sandy probably won't mind. In our marriage, we have the tendency, at least I do, the tendency of I'll say that I've forgiven someone, or actually she'll say I've forgiven this person, and then later on the hurt will come back up. And I'll say, "Are you sure you've forgiven that person?" Like very accusatory. Like, I think you need to work on that. You need to forgive that person. It doesn't sound like you've forgiven that person. And will you kind of talk about that a little bit? Because that was so profound to me, the fact that we can still hurt and yet forgive.
Yeah. So the C is commit to the forgiveness that you've experienced, so that H, you can hold on to that when you doubt.
Yeah.
And that's because we do doubt, because when we get hurt by someone or by anything, we have a kind of a conditioned response to that. So the response that we're going to have is pain creates anger, and it creates fear. Okay? So that's true no matter what kind of pain it is. So I often tell this story about this demon cabinet that we have over our stove. So I do the cooking. And so if I look down at the pans that I'm cooking, that cabinet can spot that I am not paying attention. And so it pops open and it comes forward, and the corner of it is aimed right at my head, and so when I raise my head up, wham, I
Boom.
hit the corner of that thing. Now, what do I do? Do I go, well, bless your little heart? Oh, I know that that's a Southern thing to do, but I
Yeah.
don't really do that. I punish that door for doing that to me,
Slam
for
it.
hurting me. Slam it, because that is a conditioned response. It doesn't even have to be learned. It actually is just an automatic way that God made us. That if we get hurt, we respond in anger, which distances us from whatever it is that hurt us, and fear, which protects us, which makes us say, hey, you got hurt here, you could get hurt again, you better be careful. And so this is the way that God made us to be. And so that means if my boss has been a jerk, and I go to a weekend seminar on forgiveness, and I forgive my boss for the 437 times that he has hurt me or she has hurt me, and then I see him or her on Monday morning, I'm not going to fall on their neck and go, oh, brother, sister, No, I'm not. My body will respond in a way that says, that is a situation you tend to get hurt in regularly. You are going to feel anger and fear. And so I will feel anger and fear. Have I forgiven this person? Yes, I have. Forgiveness is not what is happening here. What is happening is the way that God made me, my body is responding. And so I need to go, no, I committed to the forgiveness that I experienced so that in times just like this, I don't have to doubt that I have forgiven. I have forgiven. And this is something else. I need to take appropriate steps that I don't place myself in a vulnerable position, because he or she has demonstrated 436 times that he'll or she will hurt me. So that's really the difference there between forgiveness. You got to cut Sandy some slack, You got to go, yeah, I know you have forgiven this person, but that's just safety. You have to be safe.
Yeah. You know, what really stood out to me about this whole process, what that I'd never heard before in my reading on forgiveness, is the whole aspect of ruminating and how important that is to unforgiveness, and how you differentiate, like you just did with hurt. If I'm still ruminating on the hurt, then I need to check and see if the forgiveness is there. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, but again, rumination is something everybody does, but some people don't do it very much, and some people
Hmm.
are majoring in it. But it's just playing things over and over in our mind. And again, that is one of the ways that I can protect myself, is to anticipate situations where I could likely be injured or hurt. And so that kind of rumination is usually considered good rumination. But then we have the rumination that's harmful, and that's when we just play it over and over, and we go catastrophize and think the worst thing that can happen, and we get angry, and we get we become this ball of emotions that's like a twine ball of 20 different colored twine that's all wadded up together, and it's hard to separate out what is the hurt from what is anger, from what is the fear, from what is the unforgiveness. It's just it's a hairball, basically.
Yeah, I was going to ask what that unforgiveness looks like, what it does to us spiritually, even. You've covered the emotional and physical. What would you say spiritually or relationally?
Yeah. So it actually, so there's kind of two major ways that we can respond in unforgiveness. One is in vengeance and paying the person back, and the other is in more grudge holding and rumination, and eventually I'm going to get them back, maybe, or I'm just going to feel bad about them. So those are two different ways. Now, it turns out, and this is just a fun fact, but it turns out that there is a big gender difference. What a surprise, right?
That's what I was going to say earlier.
Between vengeance and grudge-holding.
Yeah.
And so, so who gets vengeance the most? It's men. With men, it's like you get hurt, you say, I don't even get that person. And men are 4 times as likely as women to respond to a hurt with vengeance. Women are twice as likely as men to respond in grudge holding. So the guy's like, yeah, I'm going to get him, and you get him, and then it's we're done, we're even, except he thinks that he owes the guy something, so he'll get even with the guy sooner or later. But anyway, there's this difference really, and that's a gender difference that is not 100% all men do this, all women do this. No, but on the average, there's quite a difference in the way men and women respond. Yeah, it causes problems. Holding grudges causes problems. It causes physical problems. It causes psychological problems. Rumination, that negative rumination, is highly involved in depression, anxiety, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorders, stress-related disorders, psychosomatic disorders. It's going to cause problems in people's lives when they can't get rid of the unforgiveness. They ruminate about it a lot in a negative way. Vengeance has its own problems, because, like I say, you try to get even, you feel that you've gotten even. They don't feel that you've gotten even. They feel like, wait a minute, I only hurt him 2 units of hurt, and he gave me back 4. I owe him 2. And this is because we feel our pain more than we feel the other guy's pain. And if I feel like I've been hurt 4, he thinks he only hurt me 2. You see, so so I've got to pay him back 4, and so I give him what I think is 4. He thinks it's 8. So you see how this spirals out of control.
Yeah, I had that question really earlier when you were talking about decisional versus emotional forgiveness and the difference. And I was wondering if men generally do one more than women. I was just thinking I tend to do emotional forgiveness first, or that's the one I tend to want to do first. I feel like emotionally, to make things right, I have to deal with, because women emote generally as far as empathy more than men in our relationship anyway.
No, that's true. Yeah.
And so Brandon would make like the decision to do it, and he would wait for my emotions to catch up with the decision he made about whatever the situation was. I just wondered if you've seen a difference, or if there is clinical proof or whatever of men tend to do it one way more than women.
Yeah, I think there's not much evidence that there's a difference between men and women in terms of the type of forgiveness that's held. Women tend to be slightly more forgiving than men on the average, because men are like, yeah, just get even and it's done with. But in terms of, is there a gender difference in decisional forgiveness? Is there a gender difference in emotional? Not really. There's an interesting thing. We just did a big meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is trying to reduce everything to a standard measure and then compare a lot of studies. One thing we did where we were looking at how emotional forgiveness and decisional forgiveness are related to well-being and flourishing. Now, our hypothesis was, when we went into this, that emotional forgiveness is really going to be much more related to flourishing and well-being than decisional forgiveness. In 22 different studies, though, it was just the opposite.
Wow.
You cannot imagine how embarrassing this is to scientists to have
yeah.
a hypothesis and be just totally wrong.
Wow.
It's just 24/7. I mean, it's just totally off. So in 4 out of 5 different types of flourishing or well-being, decisional forgiveness actually had stronger effects than emotional forgiveness. Only one type, and that was amazingly, I think, social well-being. So never would have predicted any of this stuff. Embarrassing, but that's what science does for us. It keeps us humble.
Wow. Well, I want to dive into a little bit of theology here because you're the forgiveness doctor, so to speak. In Matthew 6, it says, if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. So in dealing with forgiveness as you do, how do you respond to someone who asks you, see, it says there that God's not going to forgive me if I forgive? And I guess a lot of it depends on your viewpoint, your theological persuasion. But how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I say, first of all, just feel comfort that this is not talking about justification, sanctification, glorification. This is not talking about your salvation. This is talking about God's judgment of our actions, the great white throne of judgment, the one where our works will be judged, and some will be burned up like hay, straw, and stubble, and others will be refined like gold and silver. And so yes, God will judge our acts, but this is not something that has eternal consequences. This has, more, okay, well, that's something that God is going to do that just refines things so that we will, throughout eternity, not have to worry with those things hanging over our head. So that's the way that I think about it. I think God has forgiven, us before creation, before the end, the beginning of time. Our apprehension of that forgiveness occurs in time, but we are forgiven. God is not waiting around for us to not forgive somebody to say, aha, gotcha. And so I'm going to judge that. It's like, nope, God has forgiven all that stuff. But those acts were not helpful. So I'm going to just refine you of those acts. We're just going to get rid of those acts.
That's a great answer. I mean, that's a lot better than the answer that I gave my friend. I just kind of went towards salvation, and you're right. We conflate that salvation and forgiveness are the same thing, and they're not. And Jesus is not always talking about our eternal destination when he's talking about the here and now and in the new heaven and new earth as well. And so, wow, that was great. I really appreciate that. Well, we're getting down to the end of our time, but what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is there's people out there, there's listeners out there that are they're listening to you right now in their car, they're taking a walk, they're listening to this podcast, and they've been carrying a wound that they've held on to for years. If you could speak directly to them right now, just for a minute, what would you want them to know?
Well, I think there's several things that are important. And one is that forgiveness often takes time. It's not saying a particular prayer and, oh, okay, that is going to go away. And especially emotional forgiveness takes time. Decisional forgiveness is much more like, okay, I can, Peter goes, how many times do I have to forgive? 7. And Jesus says, not 7, but 77 or 70 times 7 or, every time. we can make a decision to do that. We may have to struggle to make that decision, but we can make a decision, and it happens fairly quickly. But the emotional forgiveness may bother me for a long time, and I might never be able to get rid of it. I mean, that's the discouraging thing. If somebody hurts me 77 times, I can almost guarantee that the amount of emotional damage that's done in 77 betrayals, a person may never get over that emotional damage. They will get over, they can get over they can make a decision and decide, I am going to treat this person as a valuable person. I am not going to get even with them. And they can do that 490 times or 49,000 times. So one of the things I would say is, don't expect instant relief, especially emotional relief, if you've been carrying a grudge or carrying a hurt around for a long time and it's been hurting you and been torturing you. It will probably still continue. But the second point is, if you practice any virtue, you get better at it. And if you practice forgiving, you will be able to forgive things you were out of your wildest dreams of being able to forgive if you practice this for years and years. But that habit of forgiving, or what we call forgivingness, the kind of the disposition to forgive, that also takes time to build, like any habit takes time to build. And so I've got to be patient with this. I've got to draw in the resources of the Christian community, which means prayer, which means corporate prayer for me, which means community support, accountability partners. It means drawing on the community, drawing on the resources that are available, the Christian psychology books, the theology books, And so I don't have to forgive everything this instant. I have to be patient, and let's just build more capacity to practice forgiveness as much as we can, and then things that we didn't think were possible, it turns out we're not even troubled by in years after that.
Wow. Well, that's great. That's that's really good advice. I love that. It takes something that's so simple, but it doesn't delegate it to easiness. It realizes its complicatedness of it. I love that. I've never heard forgiveness taught like this before until I read your book. It was either impossible or it was just white knuckled, and so. But I just want to tell you, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing these insights, and we appreciate it so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Enjoy being with both of you. And
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.